Pick podcast, picks and perspective with Chrys Johnson. Palpable paradox.
Hey Ben, how's it going?
Hey Chris, great to see you.
You too. Hey man, well, I'm really glad that you are taking the time to hang out and talk to me. As I've kind of outlined in previous messages, that it's a total pleasure to happen upon your playing. Instagram is such a interesting place to find new musicians and find musicians that have been obviously hustling for a long time, and I didn't know anything about them. And you're one of those guys that when I look back at your discography and like what you've been up to, I'm just like, oh wow, it's interesting. You work with some really big names and had a whole like career before you released your two albums that you have out, right? So
yeah, it's been a funny career. I kind of, as you know, I'm from Australia originally, but it was my dream to play with certain artists that I love to listen to, and a lot of them I got to play with. So it was sort of a very direct thing for me of, well, where can I go in the world where I'll get to play with the people that I'd love to play with? And so I was very lucky. When I was 21, I got a scholarship to attend New England Conservatory in Boston. And not only was that an incredible opportunity in my life, you know, that I was very fortunate to have, but it also opened the door to being in the United States, which therefore gave me the ability to play with certain people that I wouldn't have gotten to anywhere else.
That's so cool. And I imagine, had you been to the United States before you moved here?
No, not really. No, I'd come to audition. I'd saved up all my dollars and come over for an audition. And I didn't really expect anything from it. I just thought, well, look, I'll know how to audition. We'll do this. And best case scenario, they say that you did great. And worst case scenario, I learned how to do an audition.
Hey, that's a great way of looking at it, man. I can appreciate that outlook. Because there's so, I feel like maybe now more than ever in the digital age, there's so much pressure to get it right the first time. Right.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, maybe this is just my worldview, you know, but it feels that way. It feels like you have to come out swinging. I'm not saying that it never wasn't that way in the past, but like now that everything's recorded for the most part, you know, most things are recorded. The way when you release music, it's just so it's the potential for high scrutiny is there. And you're right. You know, like even if you're doing really great things, there's always a whole crowd of naysayers that are like, oh, but he's not doing it this way. So he didn't do it with that particular guitar, with those pickups. And it's like, get out, you know?
Well, it's sort of this, we are, it's the double-edged sword of being so interconnected as we are these days, you know, through the internet especially. It's amazing that I can, for example, talk to my family on the other side of the world now. You know, I mean, I'm not going to wake them up because it's the middle of the night, but, you know, I can talk to over video and there's pretty much no latency, or that we can even meet like this. You know, that's an amazing side of it. The other side of it is that people sometimes express opinions without maybe thinking before they speak via the comment box. And that is a double-edged sword as well in itself. And people deliver critiques or commentary on your playing that is not always so flattering. And oh man, it's a brave new world, but it's interesting.
Well, and I agree, and it's interesting though. Like you said, the double-edged sword is a good way to put it overall, because I think that we all do need feedback. We all do need critique, right? Like, and the internet's just not very they don't have much finesse about it. You know, oftentimes it's really just like blunt, and it's usually self-serving. But what I like to do, a friend of mine along the way once said, hey, you know, when you get critique, when you get feedback, and especially feedback that is maybe considered negative or critical, that you should pause before reacting to it and consider what about what they're saying might be true, might be true, right? Because that would be an even-handed way to go, okay, well, maybe you pop over to their profile and be like, oh, wait, this is a kid, like, all right, okay. So, but then even so, what about their experience that they're trying to relate to you could be at least true in their world, blah, 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 right? And then the same could be said for praise, right? Oh, man, Ben, you're the best, man. I've never seen anything better. You're like, oh, wow, well, this is kind of okay. All right. Well, what about, that could be true for me, the experiencer, right? That could be true. But, taking it with a grain of salt either way, right? Like not being too tied in.
I agree. I think it is absolutely something to be taken with a grain of salt. And deep down, I think we know the truth. The individual knows the truth. I think deep down, you look at it, you look at let's just relate it to playing, because that's what we're talking about today. With guitar playing or playing of music or artistic expression, you sort of know your strengths and weaknesses better than anyone else, largely. I think it just depends on how willing you are to come to terms with that personally, how willing you are to acknowledge your weaknesses, especially. And maybe that can be applied to life in some sense as well. But certainly with playing music, which is what I've primarily done in my life, I do know my weaknesses very well. And I have to come to terms with them every day. It's why it really is still a work in progress. And as for praise or criticism online or in person or wherever it may be, I take it all with a grain of salt, because, and I'm certainly not going to ignore anyone if they have something important to say to me that, there may be something that I'm not realizing about myself too. That's another part of stepping outside of myself and thinking, well, maybe they are right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's to be balanced in that way is important as well. But to a large degree, I think we often know our weaknesses. It's just a matter of coming to terms with them.
I like that. There's so many different ways to come to terms with it too, right? I think one of, because there is a certain amount of self-delusion in the actualizing of yourself, right? Like, so especially in the earlier years, and I still feel like, I'm a 25-year-old beginner, like 25-year long beginner. I'm in my 40s, but I've been playing for 20 plus years. I don't like to say 25 or 30 because even though that's true, but like it's not really it's not accurate in when I started taking the guitar more sincerely. But it's I think that true relationship with somebody obviously is a good mirror to you, right? Somebody that actually has good interests in your playing and your development and stuff. So it's good to hear those things. At the same time, man, just blaze your own path, go as hard as you want, man, because there's only one life and you should just throw it out there and see what sticks. There's a lot of ways of going at it, but I actually asked the question this morning to my Facebook friends. I said, musicians, like, you ever create something, write something, discover something, and in the process you're like, man, this is great, and then by the time you get close to releasing it, you're like sick of it, borderline hate it, and like, because you're better now or you have insight into what you were doing? And does that happen to you a little bit? Or
a little bit. For me, the way I view it is that I have to keep listening to it until I've made my peace with it. I have to, if I record something that is intended to be released to the world, or there's a high likelihood that it will end up being released to the world, I have to listen to it almost in an addictive manner. Not really, but just to be sure with myself that, okay, this is really what I'm going for. It's being represented as I want it to be, and then I need to make my peace with it, because I probably am my own worst critic. I think most of us are our own worst critic in a lot of ways. So for me, it's sort of a peacemaking process within myself. And then once it's released to the world, I don't really listen to it again. I don't really want to hear it. I'm not interested in hearing it again. I sort of think, okay, well, that's done. I'm at peace with it. I hope people enjoy it. If they don't, that's fine. I think that's actually an interesting. I think I think certain people shouldn't like your music. I think that if you're really striving to do something original, it's inevitable that there'll be a lot of people who don't like it. And you sort of, I think that's good. I think healthy disagreement is good. I think if there are people who don't like your music and have good reason, just as people who love it they should also have good reason. They shouldn't just love it without questioning why they love it.
Right. Indiscriminately throwing praise versus, yeah. And I think that's also part of that process of like listening to feedback, good, bad, or in between, is that like, is this person might be praising me as somebody because they know me or whatever, more so than the music. They're just like happy to see me successful and doing something I love. So they're like, man, which is cool.
Yeah.
Or the opposite, you could potentially strike jealousy in the hearts of feeble men and women, and they're going, your shit sucks because, and you're like, interesting. You don't got your own thing. So, all right. That could be it too.
It could.
I'm curious, man. I read here that I see these 3 names that I want to know more about, like how you worked with them. And those are John Legend, Queen Latifah, and Questlove. How did that come about?
Well, I'll start with Queen Latifah because that's a really important story for me personally as a musician. It ended up being a huge thing for me, but it's kind of funny in terms of how it worked out, and I'll explain that to you. I was, of course, in New York, and I'd started to work with the great piano player Ray Angry, who from time to time plays with the Roots. I think he plays with them full time these days, but yeah. Anyway, Ray had heard me play at Zinc Bar in the West Village in New York, and he said, "Hey man, we gotta play together." And I thought, okay, cool. I knew who Ray was, and I knew that he had played with just about everyone, had a huge list of credits, and I was flattered that he liked my playing, but I didn't necessarily expect him to get in touch. Sure. I don't know, because he's a busy person, and why would he need me for anything? But as fate would have it, about a week later, he contacted me and said, Ray contacted me and said, do you want to do this showcase for this Blue Note Records album that I played on? And it's going to have all these great musicians on it. And I thought, oh, wow. Okay, sure. And then about a week after that gig, Ray texted me and said, hey, man, can you make it to a recording session at midnight tonight? And I thought, okay, not doing anything. Sure, why not? And I didn't really know what it was for. And so I showed up to the studio. It was a place called Engine Room Audio in Lower Manhattan, I think. And I show up at midnight, and then the drummer, Marcus Gilmore, shows up, and he said, oh, yeah, it's for Queen Latifah. I said, what? Great, okay, cool. And basically from there on, we did 8 recording sessions for Queen Latifah, most of which were at MSR Studios, which is now no longer there, but, great studio in New York. And it was supposed to be an album of hers. It may still be an album of hers. I don't know. It hasn't surfaced, whatever it is. But the reason that this was such an important thing for me is because, Ray took a chance on me There were so many great musicians at this recording that just showed up. You know, a lot of people commonly associated with jazz, people like Chris Potter, Marcus Gilmore, Jeff Tain Watts, Ben Williams. Who else? I mean, it was just a revolving door of incredible musicians that I'd grown up listening to. James Genus was there playing bass. All these incredible musicians, and the music sounded incredible, you know, that we were playing. Then Ray was the music director and the producer, and I met Terry Lynn Carrington, the great drummer there, drummer, composer, music director, producer in her own right. And she really liked my playing. And from meeting her at that session, she then took me on the road for the next few years, you know, all around the world. So it was an incredible experience that thus far hasn't surfaced as a recording, but, you know, it was a big experience for me in terms of getting to play with some of the most amazing musicians, and meeting Terry, who I worked with so much after that.
That's awesome. So yeah, you never know what you're going to get when you get a call like that, especially at midnight or a late night call like that.
No, I just didn't. Look, the thing was, I wasn't doing, it was a Sunday night, I remember, and I was thinking, well, what am I doing? I'm not doing anything. Sure, why not? Yeah, man, it was great. And Queen Latifah herself was also, she was awesome, you know, she was super cool. And mostly just sort of, it was her and Ray running the recordings, and working out what she wanted and working out what Ray thought would work well in his position as a producer. And she was there at all the sessions too. And if she wanted me to play something, yeah, she'd come right up to me and tell me. So it was a pretty funny experience. You know, one minute I'm sitting on my couch, next minute I've got Queen Latifah telling me in the studio, you need to play this on this song. And it was just, man, it was incredible.
Oh, I love that. I love how in New York is one of those places. I mean, you know, obviously New York, LA, Nashville are hot spots for getting calls like that. And you just got, hey, I'm going to jet across town and just like have a thing that is kind of surreal happen to me, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it was great. And there were other names. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Who else was there on that list?
John Legend and Questlove, just because these are favorite artists of mine, you know, that I'm interested in. So I'm asking about those.
Yeah, John Legend, I played with him on TV. I did I played on the Christmas tree lighting at Rockefeller Center, and on NBC. And that was great fun. And it was again another sort of star-studded event, which was super cool. And it looked great on TV. I saw it after it aired, and it was, you know, it was freezing, man. We were playing on the top of 30 Rock. You know?
Oh man!
And which was amazing, by the way. It was an incredible experience, but it was 28 degrees outside.
No thanks.
It was really cold, but it was nonetheless an amazing experience. You know, like, yeah, I played with John Legend on that show, and that was fantastic. You know, I played with the singer Ella May as well on that same show, and that was a lot of fun. And I think that I was supposed to play on one other act's performance, but it got cut for time or something like that. But that was great. And Questlove, I played with him. I played on an album with him by a singer called Elise Legrow. And she's a Canadian singer. She's great. And I worked with her for a few years when I was doing some work with, I guess you'd say, some session work and some touring work for BMG in New York. And she was one of the artists that I got to work with. And the producer, Steve Greenberg, said, you know, we're going to record a version of this song that was written by Questlove's dad. And we want to get Questlove in to play on it. Because I believe Questlove's dad sang in a group. I can't remember the exact story, but it's something like that. Anyway, so we recorded a version of it. And I know was pressed for time because I think that he had to get to a taping of The Tonight Show. But he came in the studio for a couple of hours and he was super cool. It was recorded at the Bunker Studio in Brooklyn. And it was funny because I was in the isolation booth next to the drum room. And I was just sort of staring through the glass at Questlove. I was like, you know, you look down at yourself and then you look through the glass and it's Questlove. And, you know, hearing him through the headphones, this is going to sound like such a silly comment, but it was amazing to me, not that I had any sort of predetermined expectation of what it'd be like to play with him, but it was just amazing the kind of power that he could get out of the drums with what sounded like a really light touch on the drums. You know, for some reason in my mind, I think of any great drummer and I think of them sort of bashing the drums. I don't know why I think that. It's silly.
Same.
But he just had such a seemingly delicate touch on the drums and a groove and feel that was just like, look, I mean, it sounded like the record was done after one take, you know.
Amazing.
It was super, but he was very nice. And man, that was a dream. That was awesome.
I can only imagine, man. I've been around the Roots a fair amount because I've worked with Kirk, their current guitar player, for a long time now.
He was on the album too.
Oh, he
actually.
was?
Yeah.
Captain Kirk is the man. I love him so much.
Yeah, man, he's great.
I would just, I mean, if I found myself at the place of like, oh, well, I got this gig. Oh, and it's with Questlove, and I'm looking over through the glass, and I would probably have multiple like mini internal breakdowns and, you know, screams of joy while trying to keep it cool.
Yeah, man, that's pretty much the same for me. I just think that I was, you know, it's a strange thing because you imagine yourself getting a gig or a call like that, or like any of the ones I just mentioned, and you sort of just, you know, part of you on the inside is the music fan looking at this saying like, can you believe this? You know, and then the part of you is the musician who's like, okay, you've done this before. You just now have to do it in the presence of greatness. As with any of the people I've gotten to work with, it's sort of like there's the music fan in my head, and then there's the professional musician who's like, okay, you're in the presence of really great people right now. You know how to do this, just do it well.
They're just people, and you're hired to come in and do the thing and hit the mark, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a funny balance, but man, it's very you know, it's fortunate that I've gotten to do those things, and I got to do them in my 20s, and it was a dream come true, man. It makes you a better musician and a better person, I think.
That's really good to hear, and I'm glad that you had good experiences along the way too with all those people. I mean, Queen, I don't know what I'd probably just fumble my mouth a little bit in front of Queen Latifah. She's just like such an icon at this point. And being a little bit older, you know, than you, I was very cognizant in the late 80s and early 90s when that hip hop scene was coming together. I mean, I was in junior high and high school, and I don't know. I'd just be like, yeah, I mean, I could handle it because it's my day job. My day job is to handle it, but as you said, you know, there's a part of you that's the music fan, and you know, that's freaking out a little bit, and there's a part of me that's a professional. I'm like, Chrys, you've done this before. You've talked to famous people. You've signed contracts with really big names. Just keep it cool, man. You have to speak and use your words in the presence of famous people in royalty. Yeah,
of course, you know, and it's just an added bonus when you meet the people that you've kind of idolized, and you find out that they're cool, that they're just, you know, hey, play this. Why don't you try this? Oh, all right. It's amazing, man, and it's always an amazing experience to get to play with people in that situation.
Could you give us a small example of what Queen Latifah might have said to you in that session? Hey, could you do blah blah blah?
Yeah, you know, I mean, she had a different way of approaching it. to Ray, the producer of the sessions, you know, she was very direct. I appreciated it. It was kind of like if she wanted you to play something a certain way, or if she didn't like what you were playing, she'd just come into the live room where we were all set up, and she'd just come right up to you and say, hey, can you try it this way? You know, can you try something that feels a bit different? She didn't necessarily use like guitar terminology or anything like that.
Sure.
But she would say something like, you know, just try it with a different feel, or just try it, you know, with a different groove, you know, to make it feel a different way with the drummer. And, or she just say, no, I don't like that. Try something else. And then you just have to go through a different set of ideas that you might think of on the start, because Ray has sort of demoed out the songs. Or he'd sit down at the piano and say, hey, this is the idea for the song. Let's play it and see where it goes. And it was, you know, his idea or Queen Latifah's idea for the song. I know they'd worked it out between the two of them. But, you know, she would just be quite direct and tell you if she liked it or didn't like it. And that's great. You know, there are other situations sometimes where there's a producer and an artist sitting behind the glass at the mixing desk, and they don't say much, and you don't know what they want. So someone telling you what they do and don't want is great.
That's almost kind of like the highest form of Zen wisdom is to be clear and direct, right? And like, and you can imagine that. I mean, obviously, this isn't the case with everybody. Everybody rises to their fame or their success in different ways for different reasons. But oftentimes, and I found this too a bit, is, and I'm thankful for it in retrospect. It sometimes in the moment when stuff is really direct, I'm like, am I doing, you know, doing something wrong here? Or and if you can get out of your own way, and it sounds like you're a consummate professional in that way, that you're like, oh, cool, you want this. No problem. I'll just try it 3 other ways. We got it, because it's not my gig, and I'll just do what I'm here to try to, you know, play the part of.
There's something to be said for stepping outside of yourself as soon as you've agreed to work for someone else. I think, you know, you've as a player, you know, I think if you want to be hired in some sort of side person capacity, it pays to have humility, and know that, you know, I'm being taken care of. I'm getting hired to deliver a service here, and you know, that's the job. And I'll make my artistic statement on my own records. You know, that's the beauty of it. But I'm not going to necessarily make it my job to put my stamp all over someone else's, unless that's what they've hired me to do. But, you know, it pays to have a lot of humility, I think, of when you walk in and you're working for someone else, I think. So, and it really will stand you in good stead if you maintain that humility.
Speaking of humility, tell me about how you started so young, and you're kind of like, did you get, I was going to go into this thing. Tell me about your boy genius years, you know, but like, I'm curious, because didn't you start around 10 or something like that?
I did.
Right.
I did. Yeah. So I played a couple of instruments when I was younger. You know, my older brother had started piano when he was a little kid, and I'm just about 2 years younger than him. So I looked at my older brother playing piano, and I thought, well, I want to do that, you know. So I sort of started in piano lessons when I was, I think, 3 or 4.
Wow.
I have to check that. And not to say that I was incredible at it. I was good at playing piano, but I think my interests were somewhere else. And I played violin for a minute when I was 9 years old. But that same year, I started to become interested in actually playing the guitar. I had been aware of the guitar because my dad had, you know, George Benson albums in the house, and also Jeff Beck and stuff like that around, which, you know, I'm really lucky that I heard that stuff when I was very young.
The greats, man.
yeah, wonderful music to be, just wonderful music to have around anyway, you know, but to hear it when I was really young is fortunate. But so by the time I was 10, I absolutely wanted to play the guitar. And I just turned 10, and I'd convinced my dad to get his old guitar down from the attic. And he got it down, and I sort of started playing on the high E string. And I remember what I first played. It was sort of like, I just sort of, yeah, it's just sort of, and I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like a song. It doesn't, but I thought it did. Anyway, not long after that, I got one of those $30 guitars from a local store called the Reject Shop.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know, right? It is. It's still a store too. Anyway, it's like a, you know, it's like a 99-cent store kind of thing. And they had a $30 guitar with the strings like a foot off the neck, and found it really hard to play. But you know, I sort of learned how to play Heart of Gold by Neil Young and stuff like that. And actually, before that, I had worked out how to play a very, very busted version of Breezin' by George Benson. But I was not going to say it sounded good. It was an attempt, you know. Well, written by Bobby Womack, I should say. It was originally recorded by Gabor Szabo, but you know, it's known by being played by George Benson. But anyway, moving right along, you know, into my teenage years, I sort of turned out that I had a bit of a knack for playing guitar. So it felt natural to me, but I think it's fair to say I had a fair bit of natural ability on the instrument. But it is sort of 10% natural ability to some extent, and 90% a lot of work. You know, you've really got to work at it. And I did, and I got into a performing arts high school when I was 15, called the Victorian College of the Arts in Melbourne. And that really set me on a great path. You know, that sort of gave me a sense of personal validation, like, great, you can play, and you're on the right track, you know.
That's really amazing. I love hearing that that you had musicians around you, your brother being maybe the primary first one that kind of inspired and was like, you know, rubbing off on your way of seeing the world and hearing music, and then your dad playing cool music, and your dad being a little bit of a player too, because he had a guitar, huh?
He didn't really play guitar. He started learning guitar in the 70s. You know, he had a Yamaha classical acoustic guitar and a nylon string, and from the 70s, and a few little chord books on how to start playing open chords. And my mum was a musician. Well, she doesn't play so much anymore, you know, but she played flute and clarinet. And so she did play, and she did play around the house a little bit when we were growing up. So she was a musician when she was younger, and studied clarinet, and was very good at it actually when she was younger. But so she was a musician. There was no shortage of music around, and in my house growing up. And man, I have nothing but the best memories of those times. It was wonderful.
That's great. That's great. Because there's this, you know, like anybody that chooses music or music chooses them in this life, you know, everybody is their own path to some sort of actualization of like expression, right? And some people get this type of let's say support around them, and there's like, they're immersed. You had a certain sense of immersion, you know, having a mom and a brother, and then as your actualization became more and more apparent, then it was like, oh, well, let's get him a guitar, let's put him into school, do the things. Whereas it's like, I find it interesting. I talk to some players, and they're like, I had nobody. I had no, you know, and I don't even know how I got here. I mean, it was like a total crapshoot. Like, and usually those folks are a little bit late bloomers on some level, you know, but they find it in a different way or a different path. And so, and I kind of consider myself more in that category. It's not that I wasn't supported, but it was just haphazard, you know. When I came to it, I just knew I loved music, and I didn't know exactly what to do with it until later. But that's wonderful, because I do see the reoccurring theme is that if you get started on any instrument early and are allowed to explore, that the possibility of becoming a very proficient musician by the time you're leaving the house, let's say, that is much, much higher. And to hear that piano at 4 years old, well, that makes sense to me now.
Yeah, I think it gave me, I mean, I have perfect pitch, and that is probably why. Because the other thing was, I really hated reading music. I just as a child, I thought it was stupid, as you do when you're a child. You think things are good or stupid. No, I'm just kidding. Look, it just wasn't my thing. But I back in the 90s, God, I sound like I'm dating myself now. They had Yamaha music lessons. They had these cassette tapes, that you'd take home, and you'd have a demo of whatever the song was, and I would learn the song off the demo tape, by ear to play on piano. Not that I'm trying to paint myself out to be some sort of prodigy, but I just mean it was like a practical thing for me, that I just can't wrap my head around this written music. So I'm going to listen to what's on the tape and find where the notes are. And if there's any reason why I have perfect pitch, that's probably it.
So do you feel so you kind of had a natural tendency, you weren't trained into perfect pitch necessarily as much as you were innately just going, okay, this is how it works better for me, is to transcribe or to sort it out by listening, because looking at the lines in the paper kind of tripped your brain a little bit, or what?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was just a matter of the notes on the page were confusing to me. And to be honest with you, I didn't become good at reading until I was in my mid-teenage years, and I was playing guitar, and it was becoming sort of a problem. It was like, okay, we have to address this now. And to this day, I'm not an incredible reader, but I'm a good reader. Give me a few minutes and I'll have it for you.
That's nice.
I can single line stuff, I can pretty well sight read. If it's more than single line stuff, give me a couple of minutes and we'll have it. Once I've worked out some fingerings and all that sort of stuff, I just sort of made my peace with that. That's one of my weaknesses, I'm a good reader, not a great reader.
And having perfect pitch, this is something that I've kind of wondered a little bit, and do you feel like having that perfect pitch ability and hearing things so kind of crystal clear versus it almost probably in more like an HD format versus the average listener, does it make a lot of music less interesting or hard to listen to? Because if it's not kind of up to par in kind of in perfection in some way, does that bother you, or do you have to kind of turn it off? Or
I've adjusted to it, certain pitch discrepancies, and I sort of had to make my peace with the fact that pitch discrepancies are inevitable. They are, if something's mildly out of tune, certainly when I was younger, it really upset me, it sort of got to me on a level that was sort of very, I don't know, it almost made me feel nauseous, when I'd hear something that was even slightly out of tune. But you get a bit older, you experience music and life a bit more, and you find out that, okay, well, pitch discrepancies can sometimes be just unavoidable. And probably becoming a better player on the guitar, I realized that pitch discrepancies are, in fact, inevitable on a stringed instrument. No matter how good it is, no matter how good the instrument is, no matter how well you've adjusted the intonation, it is still a piece of wood with 6 or more strings on it. And sometimes you're going to bend a note and it's not quite going to work out exactly as you thought it would. And that's just the nature of the beast. It's sort of something that I've come to terms with and even come to love, because then when you start going back and listening to your favorite musicians and hearing the odd, bend that didn't quite work out perfectly in tune, you realize, well, that adds to the magic of it in some kind of way. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a mistake or an error, or it's just part of the musical statement. And that's something that I've also made my peace with. And yeah.
That's cool. Well, I'm impressed with how you have made peace with it. Because that's the thing that I imagine. I had there was a classmate when I went to a small time 2-year musical degree up in Washington years and years ago. There was this blind kid, and he was just perfect pitch, and he was in it seemed like all my writing and theory classes, and he was just like the one that had the answer all the time for everything, and we had to kind of like, okay Nick, you know. But I could tell that he would get irritated at when things were, you know, not. And he's like, he wanted to fix everything,
Yeah.
you know, for everybody, or adjust their voicing, you know, all these different things. And I thought, wow, that's like a blessing, and, you know, obviously, because most of us don't have it. But a curse in that you have to work. It's a workaround now, because it's like so far past what most of us perceive, that then you have to kind of like do what you're saying. Yeah, well, I've had to make peace and pull it back and be like, oh, it's okay for things not to be absolutely in alignment, and find the beauty in the less than perfect, right?
Absolutely. You know, and it's sort of, it ends up sort of, I think, perfect pitch. In a lot of, I say perfect pitch because it's the commonly used term. I think absolute pitch is a more accurate term. Perfect pitch is, you know, perfect. I mean, perfect, you could open up an entire philosophical discussion about how appropriate the term perfect is in terms of music and a variety of other things too. I think perfect pitch is the commonly accepted term, and I use that term, but it is sort of maybe a little inaccurate in some ways, you know, I mean, or at least up for debate in terms of its use.
Sure. When do you remember when you realized that you heard things that like more crystal than most people around you? Was there a moment?
Yeah, well, it was actually my piano teacher pointed it out, and she at the time said, "Oh wow, you have perfect pitch." I think I was 6 at the time, because for a couple of years at that point I had been learning the songs off the cassette tape, by ear, and I'd gotten away with it until I remember one lesson. I hadn't practiced as much as I should have for the piano lesson, and I made one mistake, and the piano teacher said, "Well, yes, that's great, but you made this one mistake," and pointed to it on the piano score. And I said, "Oh." She said, "Yes, just this one note. Just have to see this note. Just play that differently." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I didn't know what it was on the page, so I sort of just played a different note, and it was still wrong. And she said, "You can't read this?" And I said, you know, I was 6. You know, I remember this quite well.
Sure.
I was sort of embarrassed. You know, I went red in the face and was like, "Oh, I can't read it." You know. And but much to my surprise, she was really happy, because she said, "Oh my God, you have perfect pitch."
You're not in trouble. You're not in trouble. You're amazing.
Yeah. Which was, you know, which was cool. So look, man, it was, I remember, funnily enough, I remember my childhood really, really in a lot of great detail, almost perfectly. And I remember those moments. And yeah, I just learned it off the tapes, and that developed my ear. And it was when I was 6 and the teacher pointed it out, that's when I realized that I had this hearing that would work in my favor for music.
Amazing. That's a super cool story. Now, do you have to fight off constantly registering like the sounds and the tones and the notes of like your environment when you move through the world?
A little bit, you know. I mean, I will hear a train horn, and hear that. I remember in New York, there'd be a certain train horn that I realized was in like a F sharp minor 7 flat 5 chord, you know, like it was the train horn was this exact voicing. Where is it? Let's see if I can play it. It's like a third inversion. It's like, where's my sound? Oh, whoops, no, that's not it. It's like a train would go past and it'd play that.
Wow.
And I do remember waking up one morning and thinking, oh yeah, it's F sharp minor 7 flat 5, you know. And it just registered in my mind, and I thought, I sort of caught myself and thought how silly that was. What are you doing? That's just silly, you know.
That's kind of cool though. I watch a reasonable amount of Rick Beato. I don't know if you ever
yeah, Rick's great. Absolutely.
Yeah, and he's always training his kids, you know, his kid, his boy, right? And like he has a couple of videos of just like, hey, we're just doing this ear training with my boy, and the boy's looking away, and he's just like firing off all these notes and intervals, and then complex, like two-handed extended chords with ninths and 13ths, and he's just nailing them. I'm like, oh man, that is amazing. I wish, Rick, will you be my dad? Can we start this over again? Can you be my dad?
That was the first video of Rick's that I saw with his son Dylan, I think. You know, like maybe 5 years ago, I spoke to Rick about this actually, and I just thought it was so cool back then. I was like, whoa, man, this is. I don't think any of us had seen anything like that, you know. So it was just incredible.
Yeah, I'd only seen it before, like I said, with that classmate of mine, and it really like blew my mind when Nick. Like we had a songwriting class, and this classmate Nick was always sit in the front row. He was blind, right? So, and I think that obviously was part of his heightened sensory intake. But I just remember the day that we got introduced to his abilities, and somebody came in and set an acoustic guitar down at the front of the room, and it had a capo on it, and it just kind of went. Boing, you know how like you set it down and it just and Nick giggles. He goes, capo on the 3rd fret, and I was like, and then the teacher goes, oh, everybody meet Nick. He has perfect pitch, and we're like, whoa, that it's like I kind of heard about that. There's like a mythical legend of like, but I had never been in the room with somebody that just was on all the time. So
yeah. That's incredible, man. That's so cool.
Well, so let's kind of shift back towards your coming up. Like, I'm curious about when you got into guitar, how did your relationship with the guitar pick begin? And do you remember anything about the first few picks that you ended up using, and how did you get from there to what you're playing now?
The very first guitar picks that I ever had were in a little plastic packet that was included on the front of a magazine called Play Guitar Magazine. And Play Guitar Magazine was a British magazine that they had TV ads on for at the time. And I think that the commercial on TV was like, Play Guitar Magazine, learn to play guitar. I think it even had a British accent. Anyone in England, forgive me for my terrible accent. Anyway, that's what the ad sounded like. Anyway.
Half the people thought you were British the whole time anyway. It's okay.
I know. I've gotten it my whole life. Don't worry. Anyway, I except for people in England, by the way, when I've been to England, people come up to me and they're like, "Yeah, you're Australian. We know, there's because there's so many Australians in London. At least it's sort of not that much of a shock. But you come to the US and there's not as many Australians. People are like, oh, you're Australian." Anyway, what I was going to say was, it was on the front cover of a magazine. There was a little plastic bag of picks, and basically it was green. They had 3 thicknesses, if I remember correctly. They had a really thick one, a medium one, and a thin one. And I thought, oh wow, that's pretty cool, And basically, that was where I started off, and I liked the really thin one for strumming. I liked didn't like the super thick one because I had a cheap acoustic guitar and it didn't sound. I'm not going to blame it on the pick. I mean, I couldn't play. It was You know?
Sure.
It was, but I think I found it hard to use. So I used the medium thick one and the really thin one. And anyway, from there on, I mean, I actually held on to those picks for years. I think I still have them at my parents' house. Those
What?
original, the one of them was green. I don't remember which one it was. I think it was the medium one. It's still at my parents' house, you know. And I found it when I was home last, you know, which is a couple of years ago now. I found it. I was like, wow, can't believe this is the same one I had when I was 10, you know. Anyway, time's gone by, and I've gravitated particularly toward this Dunlop Sharp pick, which I have.
Oh, wow. The 1.14.
The 1.14 Tortex pick. And for me, it's been I've used it for 10 years now. It's the one for me. It's got a, you know, it does just about everything I need it to, you know, like it gives me kind of a bit of, it can give me the attack in the way that I'm looking for, but it can also, if you pick a little lighter, it's, you know, as delicate as you need it to be as well. So I love that.
It's interesting. Yeah, I don't know I'm trying to think. I don't know that I've ever come across another more jazz kind of, you know, influenced or voiced guitar player that uses that particular pick. I mean, there's the guy, I don't know if you're familiar with Polyphia and Chon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Those guys, everybody in those bands both use that same pick. I don't know if you know.
Really?
That. Yeah.
I didn't know that. What does Mario use this pick in Chon?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man, I would have had no idea. I love this pick. This is to me the best. Look, to this point, this is my favorite pick. I've used it for literally since 2011, and man, I love it. It's just great. I have the rounded one too, just in case.
Sure.
If I want something different, but I rarely do.
That's cool, man. And so, yeah, like I know that Tim and actually all three of the guys in Polyphia, I'm pretty sure Clay uses it on bass as well.
Really?
I think they cut for a moment there. Scotty had the like a smaller Jazz 3 Tortex that he kind of went to and then came back. But I'm pretty sure the Chon boys, both of those guys are on the same purple Sharp. And then you know, it's a little thicker, but Jeff Loomis from Nevermore, he's super shredder. He's also in Arch Enemy and stuff. He's used the Sharp 1.5 for a long time. Then I have to send you one of these if I can find it. We made when I was at Dunlop, we made a molded version of his pick, which is it's like an Ultex Sharp. It's an Ultex version of that. Of what you have there, but a 1.5. Really? Yeah, and it's got like a little indented grip. I'll find it at some point. I usually have one of these things sitting around, but you know, I gotta as most guitarists do, I have just like a boatload of picks sitting around.
Yeah, I do too.
It's like I don't play all these picks. I have like 3 picks that I really, really like, and then I've got all these other picks because you know I might want them, and maybe somebody else will want to use them.
Yeah.
But that's cool. It's a unique pick that not a lot of people gravitate towards because I think it is more difficult. The barrier to entry is a little more difficult because of the real slim, the narrowness of it allows you to get kind of maybe too deep into the strings if you're not careful. How do you hold yours? Can you show us how you hold yours?
Sure. I mean, I can sort of give you an angle of the. I mean. It's really, you know, if you can imagine just a millimeter or probably 2 millimeters worth of the pick hitting the string, that's what I'm doing at any given time. So I'm sort of just holding it, you know, pretty, I guess, in a fairly standard manner, you know, making sure that probably just, about 2 millimeters worth of the tip of the pick touch the strings at any given time.
Okay. Yeah, I think, and that's, I mean, obviously great players use that pick. And I mean, funny, I'm trying to think of what the story was, but Jimmy Dunlop told me one day, actually, I think it was because I had noticed a trend between Chon and Polyphia and a few other players. I was like, it's weird that it's not a super popular pick, but it is in smaller circles with really good players. So, because like the barrier to entry, like the more rounded pick is a little easier to control. It can't get stuck in the strings as easily. And some of the players that use your pick will, I wish I had one sitting here, but oh, actually there's a version of the Jeff Lemus one. It's not the this one is custom printed, but
that's cool.
That's Ultex, and it's so, but like a lot of people would like use this pick and kind of choke up on it a little bit more, so that their thumb allows for, not for only that 2 millimeters to go into the strings. But you just showed me, you kind of hold it in kind of normal. And so did Chon and Polyphia. They like the space they can get away from the strings in a way, right? And just use the tip.
I agree with that completely. Yes, that is exactly why I like it. And I can get a broad variety of tones out of it, in terms of, when I say tones, tone is often thought of, in terms of gear and amps and EQing and so forth. But, I really think tone starts at the pick. And I really can adjust the attack in such a way that I can really get a lot of attack with this.
Yeah, that's kind of the magic of Tortex. So and I speak about this a little bit on a lot of podcasts, but just to educate, is that Tortex it is made out of a sheet, right? There's a sheet of the material and it's stamped out of the material, and then it's tossed into a tumbler. And then because it has really harsh edges in the beginning, but when you stamp the shape out of a sheet, you get a hard, like, square edge essentially. And so you tumble it, but the square edge remains essentially in comparison to a molded pick, let's say. So on a molded pick, like I'll use an extreme example. I really love the flow picks, and these are Ultem based, but the edge of them is really super smooth and molded, right? So these picks are made for quick release from the strings, like ultra fluidity, and they're fast. And sometimes I hand some of these type of picks, to people that aren't really familiar with using them. They're like, wow, that's really crazy. I gave one to Jeff Loomis, and he was like, this is so crazy fast. But then after going back and forth, he thought he was going to switch over to a flow pick. And he's like, no, actually, at the end of the day, I like the little bit of drag that my squared pick gets. And there's a little bit more rasp because it's, to the average person, they're not noticing these things. They're like, oh, it's a pick. Oh, that one's thick. That one's medium or whatever. But when a great player goes in and kind of dissects, like, why does this pick work and this one doesn't, or what, why do I get this effect? It tends to be molded versus stamped. And the molded tends to be to try to go faster and more smooth and less string noise. Right. And then the Tortex it initially mimicked a tortoiseshell, pick. And there's a little bit of just a little bit of, and with the sharper pick that you have, allows for more of that kind of grit on the string. So yeah, I'm impressed that what it sounds like I hear you talking about is being able to that you find a wide range of dynamic with that particular plectrum, right? I
can achieve a wide variety of dynamics absolutely with this. I just feel as though it's just, when I used to do more recording sessions and sometimes pop recording sessions, I did sometimes keep a thinner pick around as well, just in case I had to do some sort of rhythm guitar strummy part. But I ended up not even using it that much, because it turned out that with the very pointy tip of this, I could still get that if I would end up sort of holding it closer toward the edge. And in fact, it was the pointy tip was enough to get that same sort of quality, at least the way I was playing it, as a thinner pick playing like a strummed part or something like that. on a pop recording or something, and it ended up just being the most versatile for me. So I stuck with it, and I haven't changed it. I really love these picks.
That's cool, man. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's
Yeah.
it's a part of my favorite part of this this podcast is just even no matter how similar the stories are, I think it's always interesting to hear what people remember and how they came upon. Do you remember how you found that pick by chance? Like somebody give it to you, or?
I worked at a guitar store before I moved to Boston in 2011. I worked at a guitar store for 4 years from when I was a teenager, you know, and I just worked there. I didn't really have much of a social life. I went to school and I worked at this guitar shop, you know, and I practiced. And basically they just had this big, you know, one of those big plastic boxes of picks that you lift the lid off and there's all these picks in it, you know. And I just, I remember at that time I did like these picks, you know, the ones with the rounded off edge. But then all they had one day was the sharp pick. They said, oh, we're out of those, but we've only got this sharp one. Why don't you just, you know, try that one and we'll give you the rounded one when we have it. So it was pure chance. Mm-hmm. And that was it. You know, this was all they had in stock, and it was apparently not that popular, at least at this store, you know. And I love it. I was just perfect the minute I played it. And at that point in time, I was primarily playing like an Ibanez AS50 from the 80s, you know, so like a 335 type guitar. But it worked perfect on that, worked perfect on any guitar I play, really.
That's so cool, man. Yeah, it's always an interesting journey to see where that ends up. So I guess one of the things that I like to ask some off questions that aren't necessarily music related, right? And
sure.
And I'm just curious, you know, like what concerns you maybe the most about our modern age?
Ooh, our modern age. Goodness me. You know, what concerns me is that we all need to be better listeners. We all need to listen. We need to listen before we speak. We need to consider our words. And I think listening is really important to me. And I'm not saying listening to music. I mean, yes, listening to music, but listening to each other, listening to everything that's going on around us, and making sure that we listen to people in the world and understand what's going on. You know, listen to those close to us, and you know, this is going to sound really corny, but I'm concerned that I don't see maybe as much kindness as I used to, you know. And I think that, look, I want people to be good to each other. Yeah, I know that sounds really corny, but I actually do feel that way. And it's why I love music, because to me, music is the great unifier. It's the great unifying force, because you can get people from all walks of life in the one room, in the spirit of music, connecting with whatever that energy is you're accessing through playing music.
That's a good answer. I like that, because I would happen to agree that it's oftentimes we just, you know, and I get caught in it too, but where we're listening just to respond, right? Like instead of because we want to be heard, and so we're only giving the platform or the space for somebody to say something so that we can clap back on them. You know, especially in internet chat rooms and all this type of thing, and political views and, you know, social issues. So that is a really, really good advice. I think it's a really good spotlight, and especially coming from somebody who is could be considered a professional listener, right? So that's perfect pitch, right? So I mean, like I would put you in that category that maybe because I would dare I say that, like, that's and maybe the most integral part to your success as a musician is having the faculty and continue to develop the faculty of listening, so that you know how to properly respond with appropriate phrases.
Yeah, it's
right?
true. I've learned that from music. That's why I consider this to be, your question is a great one. I think listening to me is so important. I've learned that from music, that in order to be a great musician, or to be in the pursuit of becoming a great musician, I'm not saying I'm great. I think greatness is something that you pursue, and is not something that you personally can determine if you are great. I think that is, you aspire to greatness, and the rest is up to the listener to determine. But I have learned that from music, that in order to learn, you'd have to listen. And philosophically, I think that can be applied to life. And I've always felt about human life that we're all in this together, whether we like it or not. And we therefore need to listen to each other and do the best we can.
Yeah. Do you subscribe to a belief system, religion or otherwise?
Nothing that I practice. No. No.
Were you raised around it a little bit, or?
I was raised as an Anglican Christian in Australia, and I think that there are many parts of that are really beautiful. But I just I've been so fortunate, it's funny, man, because it all comes back to music for me. I've gotten to, this is where I have to really count my blessings, that I've gotten to travel the world playing music. And I've gotten to see how people live in, I think, every continent at this point. And to see that there are surface level differences, but far more similarities, is one of the most humbling learning experiences that you can have, and makes me, again, grateful to be a musician, because I just would have never gotten to do that. I would have never gotten to learn that, were it not for, funnily enough, the guitar and music, and getting to do that for my life. And that's a really amazing, humbling experience when you find out how similar we all are. And again, whether we like it or not, we are all in this together on Earth. And we've got to do the best we can within those confines.
And so I'm curious, given the information of the day, all the things facing humanity in this time, how do you find hope?
Well, man, this past year's been tough for all of us, I think. I've the way that I've found hope, I had to sort of get in touch with who I was again, I'm 31 now. And toward the end of my 20s, I did start to feel like a bit of a professional workhorse, and age 29. So in the year 2020, I was 30, and it coincided with this huge global shutdown, which again was another double-edged sword. That's my term of the day, which, it was another sort of, it was a moment of reflection, which can be a good thing and a dangerous thing. But it ended up being an overwhelmingly positive thing, because I was able to all of a sudden have my calendar, whether I liked it or not, wiped clean for the year 2020. And I had to reflect on everything I'd done in my life to that point. I think a lot of us were in that boat. And I sort of had to think, okay, well, let me be honest with myself. What have I done right? And what have I done incredibly wrong? And life is such that inevitably there'll be some of both. And what can I take away from this to make the next 10 years of my life, should I be so lucky to live the next 10 years of my life? What can I take away from my experience thus far to ensure that I have hope and a plan for the next part of my life? And it was a really great personal period of reflection, and going through some of the things, you know, a process of evaluation of what I've done up to this point. It gave me hope, because I thought, to me, the key to everything is music. You know, I just think music is this undeniable part of our lives that that is, perhaps if you're not actively listening, it's always playing in the background. I think if I had a complaint about the time that we live in, it's that music is not valued in the same way that perhaps it was. But it's not all bad. Things change. Perception changes. All sorts of things change. And also the way we digest music has changed. And people are now we still have active listeners, just in different ways to how we used to, you know. Maybe people don't sit down with a glass of scotch and listen to an LP from beginning to end in the way that they might have. But people actively listen in different ways. So discovering that we can all connect in a largely positive way from all around the world, online, during that time, to me, through a very dark time in history, which was last year and continuing into this year, that kind of gave me hope. You know, that overwhelmingly, there's a lot to be thankful for in life. And there's a lot of good in the world, even though we're presented with so much of the bad. And there is a lot of good in the world, and I do my best to focus on that, you know, because I think there is a lot of good stuff.
There sure is. There sure is. And I think, thank you for that. That's a nice insight into, you know, your thought process through the last year. And I think that, I think a lot of us are probably nodding our head going, yeah. I mean, I had to think about all what am I even doing? Is any of the things that I'm doing like worth the time of my life, you know? And what do I want to see in the next 5 to 10 years if I'm so lucky, you know? And so am I going to continue building on the things that I've been doing? I'm one that occasionally likes to take sharp turns and go like, that's it. I'm done with all these things. I'm going to do something new. In that, you know, I feel like I've kind of lived multiple lives in this one life. But I find it to be an interesting place to be now, like in 2021, feeling like there's a lot of our verbiage that would indicate that on a large, we feel like pandemic is over.
Yeah.
Right. You know, like it's because we want it to be over. And then, and in some ways it is, it's moving on, but then you get a lot of information and the information says, no, it's not over. And we're still in the thick of it. So I find myself from day to day, you know, depending on what I've allowed into my system through news or outlets or media or anything like that. You know, it can, if your focus strays too far, which I think it should sometimes, like kind of much in the way that you said, you know, some people shouldn't like your music, right?
Yeah.
You know, like much in that way, that contrast is like you do have to do kind of mental exercises and think about things that are unpleasant, and pore over them a bit, right? To figure out, well, what did I do wrong in this life so far, and not to, you know, harsh yourself about it, but for pure informational purposes on how to proceed. And we're kind of in an interesting cross section at this point now.
Absolutely, we are. And I just think, you know, I'd like to see a bit more love in the world. I don't see many messages of love around these days. I'd love to see a bit more of that. I'd love to see a few more messages of love and unity, and I think that's what makes life great, for me anyway. And to me, my path to that is music, because I feel as though it connects to an energy that is greater than us. And I don't know what that energy is, but that's why I keep playing.
Yeah, that is awesome. And I feel, yeah, I'll hear that and take it in, because the more, when I stop and think about music, I think, oh wow, there's this thing that we enjoy that is truly, it's unseen. It's like the wind. It's like the wind, right? Like we know it's there.
Yeah.
But I don't physically see it. I don't see the notes, right? Like, but I feel the breeze, you know, when you play.
I love that. That's great.
So in that, in you kind of, you know, giving a nod to the unseen, unknown energy behind all things, so to speak, behind this experience. Really, it makes me think of like John McLaughlin, you know, like it makes me think of like, in the way, I mean, what a monster player and influence on the world at large. But in other players and people that have that took their playing in this kind of sincere yet sacred place, you know, and it's like, oh, don't take me too seriously, but I am sincere about that. There's something greater than me is shining through, and embracing the mystery overall, I guess.
I think so. I agree. And I just think that for me is why, you know, it's so funny, because I can sound like I'm, on one level, it can sound maybe to some people as though I'm avoiding the question, but I'm not, because everything for me goes back to this music and the pursuit of that sort of energy, that otherness that exists through the music. And that really is what it all comes back to for me. And the unity that I have seen music create, getting to play music all over the world, and you know, anywhere, pick a place, you know, in the United States, in Australia, anywhere, seeing who shows up and who you get to play for and who you get to meet after you play. Man, I really miss that. I miss meeting people after a show, because you meet such a broad cross section of wherever you are. And I love it. There's just something very special about that communal experience of coming together in the name of music. That's what it's all about for me. And that to me is the greatest thing.
I love that, man. Well, I will leave. That's great answers. Thank you for sharing that part of your yourself with me and with us, with the fans. And I guess the other main question I like to ask is I'm always interested in what you're listening to these days, and like, is there potentially any players out there that aren't that well known that you might like share with us, and maybe an album or a track to check out, because that's always fun to find new things, right?
I mean, one of my favorite guitarist to listen to, not that I've listened to him that often recently, but was a guy who's sort of a peer of mine in New York. He's, I think, a couple of years ahead of me, but he was in New York before I was. But a guitarist called Travis Reuter, Reuter, and he doesn't have a lot about him on the internet. But I played on an album with him in 2015. I don't think it came out a couple of years after that. It was called Wake Up Call by David Weiss, a trumpet player I played with a lot at the time, and for a number of years actually. And that particular lineup of the band was there were two guitars and trumpet and saxophone. So it's sort of, it's jazz, but I wouldn't say strictly jazz. But anyway, so in this particular lineup on that album, it's mostly myself and Travis handling the guitar duties. And I'm just shocked that Travis doesn't have more of a sort of, you know, people singing his praises, because to me, he's my favorite one, personally. Mind you, there are so many great players right now that it's sort of, I'm forgetting about 500 names.
Sure. That's the way it is.
You know, but just the first person off the top of my head that I mention from time to time is Travis. I'm hoping he's going to put a record out one day. You know, he does have an album out from some years ago, but his playing's changed a bit since then. And that album with David Weiss is a good representation of the direction his playing has gone in. He's living in Europe these days, but he's American.
Okay.
Yeah.
Travis Reuter?
Reuter, yes.
Reuter. Reuter.
That's correct, yeah. And,
okay.
You know, he and I have talked about possibly doing some project together in the future. I'd love to, man. He's a wonderful player. And, you know, I suspect you'll be hearing more from him, I hope.
Cool. If there was one big name artist out there that you could be like the new guitarist for that group or artist or band or whatever, if there was one or two out there, who would you be like, I'll do the thing with them?
Well, if you know, if Joni Mitchell ever reformed some kind of band, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But you know, if Joni Mitchell ever reformed a band, I would be first in line. You know,
that's amazing.
Voluntarily first in line. I'm not saying she would pick me. I'm just saying that I would force my way to the front of the line.
Pick me.
Pick me, exactly. It's just no question about it. But I don't know if Joni's doing that kind of thing these days, so that's okay. But you know, for the sort of lineage of guitarists that she had working alongside her from you know, when she sort of went electric, so to speak, in '74, you know, with that beautiful playing from Larry Carlton. Robin Ford played with her. I think next up was Pat Metheny. I think next up was Steve Lukather for a second, and then Mike Landau. I mean, you know, firstly, varied guitar players, you know. You know, to go from Robin Ford to Pat Metheny to Steve Lukather, you know, I mean, is kind of amazing to me, but is perfect for the music when you listen to that 70s, 80s chronology. You know, I mean, what a wonderful lineage of guitar players at that time, especially. But yeah, man, I'd love that.
Cool, man. Well, Joni, if you're listening, and if you're going to get the band back together, my boy Ben here is ready. He's primed and ready.
Pick me.
Joni. No, over here. My hands up, right here. No, it's great. I didn't know that Steve Lukather was a part of that lineage either, actually.
It's only, he didn't, as I understand, Joni asked him to go on the road with her, sorry. But he played guitar on half of Wild Things Run Fast in, I think, 81, 82, you know. And it was Mike Landau on the other half of that album. But then he ended up sort of working with her more on the following albums, Dog Eat Dog, Chalk Mark in a Rainstorm, and it was mostly him after that. So Mike Landau. So, but nonetheless, you know, Steve Lukather on that one album, I mean, God, you know, between the two of those guys, I mean, you've just got about got the whole guitar covered, you know. And then some.
Yeah, absolutely. Lukather and Landau, both incredible beasts on the instrument.
Yeah.
And so then what can we expect? Are you working on more solo stuff, or what's coming forth from your personal stash?
Yeah, man. Well, look, the next thing up for me is, you know, during this whole lockdown period, I've just been putting videos on YouTube. You know, I've just sort of been keeping that going as sort of a digital performance outlet, if you will. You know, it's not quite the same as playing for an audience, but it is playing for an audience, just in a different way. And I've had such a great response from putting videos of my playing up on YouTube in this last year that I'm just going to keep doing that for now. But I am writing some music for a new trio project. I don't know who's going to play on it yet, but I'm hoping that maybe later this year or early next year, I'll be jumping back in the studio and doing whatever the next record is, you know, which is what, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of what I pride myself on the most is my own recorded work. That's the best representation of my playing and what I'm trying to contribute. So I do have another trio record in the works that we'll see if I can record either at the end of this year or early next year. So I'll keep you posted.
Please do. I think I told you that the Ace album is so incredible. I like both of the albums, the previous album too. I'm blanking on.
Thanks, man.
Is it Autumn? Yeah, Autumn.
Autumn. Yeah.
I love both of them. And I think I told you when I first started listening to them that there was a couple days or a week or so there where I just listening to them on repeat, and I'd switch from one to the other and go back and forth. And it's interesting. My favorite tracks out of all of them are Ace of Hearts and Three of a Kind, right back to back.
Oh, cool.
I like all of them. They're all good. It's all really amazing. But like when I want to listen to Ben, I put those. I just let those two tracks play back to back. There's something. I don't know. I like the expansiveness. I like that there's this rock element that you have, and I love that you utilize the rock element in a really, like kind of professional. Like it's not outlandish rock, but you can tell that there's volume in the room when you play. So I don't, that's just an interesting thing, because the whole production of how you capture your expression is the whole other element. That obviously we could spend 3 or 4 more podcasts just on, like, how do you capture the statement that you're making? It's not just purely about making the statement. Once you're able to make the statement on the instrument, that's great. So then there's all the minor inflection that can shift it one way or the other, and then in the dynamic within that, and then there's how it gets captured and then ultimately layered and put out. Do you do a lot of layering, or it doesn't sound like there's a lot of multi-track, but
that's a good question. For that album, it was mostly live in the studio. I'd say 90% live in the studio. And just because that was the thing that my co-producer and engineer on that, Michael Perez Cisneros, he just knew the sound of my playing and the sound of that band that we were playing at the time in New York a lot. And I wanted Michael to co-produce that with me because he knew how to capture it perfectly, so that he could capture that live energy on a record, which for me is sort of the goal. The studio is inevitably going to be different to live. But if we can capture as much of that energy and send it on a record around the world, as much as people can hear it around the world, then that's the goal. So it was mostly live in the studio. And there were guitar overdubs, but, they were just done after the fact. And I was very picky about the overdubs. I didn't want it to be overproduced,
Mm-hmm. Do you find yourself I feel like a lot of jazz influenced or predominantly jazz based musicians kind of have a bit of like a hard line. They're like, they try their hardest to keep the one take or minimal takes type of approach, and kind of what you're describing. Like, I want to capture what happens when it's just 3 of us in a room, and I want to get that even a little bit of sound of the room. I want to know that there's air in the room versus the production where it pulls the air out, and you're not sure if any of these people were in the same room when they performed it. You're just but it's clean, baby. It's clean, So
there are pros and cons for both approaches. I think, we, generally speaking, I think that if we didn't have it by take 4 or take 5, it's time to try it again on another day, because it just isn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have it by take 4, if you don't have something, by take 4 or take 5, then it just isn't going to happen that day. So we did spread that album out over, the recording process took about a year, for various reasons. That was also because of scheduling, because, people had tours and stuff, I was on tour for a bit of one of those years, and it was just, that happens. But most of it was done live. I'm not really a purist when it comes to recording things live. I think that I'm also a fan of using the studio as an instrument, so to speak. You know, plenty of people do that too, and do, you know, I mean, it's been since the multi-track recording came about, you know, it's, you know, in the 60s as standard. But anyway, yeah, I mean, look, most of it was live, but no, I'm no stranger to layering stuff on top if necessary. There was one song on the album that we did have to do one instrument at a time, but I won't tell you which one it is.
Now I'm going to go back and listen and see if I can pick it out.
But that's, I guess that is the 10 tracks. So yes, nine out of 10 of them were live in the studio.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how often do you find that it's the first take, or, you know, that is the thing?
Ooh, on that album, were there any first takes? Let me think. Because I actually remember it really well. I don't think any of those were first takes, but they were definitely second takes. The first track, Shadow in the Sky, that was the second take.
Okay.
And we did a third take, but that was it. I knew we got it on the second take.
And overall, outside of that album, how do first takes work in your world? Do you hold them in high regard? Like, you know, kind of the myth of like, oh, if you gotta get that magic first take, you know, is that a thing for you, or not so much?
It hasn't been a thing for me. I think it's because you know, I think it can be a thing. I think that it might be a thing. I hope it is. But that's actually something that I've had great first takes, but I just generally find that the second or third or maybe fourth take is usually better, just because we're sort of, I won't rule it out, but for me, I think that the later takes, maybe just you've warmed up to the song a little bit in the studio, because, you know, all of a sudden there's probably not an audience in the studio cheering you on, I hope. You know, you know, there's, you know, you've got to warm up to that situation, but we'll see, maybe in the future.
Yeah, no, that's cool. It's good insight, because you know, there's some people just have that as like a kind of a rule that they're trying to get in there and get the freshness out, you know, and then come back to it. I know, yeah. I've heard even a few people that will only do one take of a song and then move on to the next song, only do one take and then take a break or whatever and come back. And so each time they run through the song, it's kind of like the first take of that particular effort, you know?
Yeah.
Which is an interesting, you know, it's a way.
Yeah. Look, it's kind of, it comes down to that luck, you know, in the moment. Sort of, I don't like saying luck necessarily, but just the way that you know, the energy, or the energies converge in the room at that moment in time. I think that's what a lot of it comes down to, and it's really hard to quantify what it is that makes that work. But on that record, I didn't really want to have a lot of overdubbing of solos and all that kind of stuff. Nothing wrong with that. I just wanted to capture an energy, as best you can through recorded sound, you know.
No, I dig that. I like that's, like you said, like there's nothing wrong with it. Like it's really about, I think more than anything, be clear about what's your intention, and and if you don't have an intention around that aspect of the recording, then fine, a hybrid approach or whatever tends to work out. But it is always interesting to hear about the intention. Some people go into the studio with the intention of, hey, I got to get, we can work the songs out, but when it comes to my solos, like I'm going to go back and try to get them all, maybe not in the first take, but all in one take, and not, you know, some people were in that place, you know, but I really, for me, the most important thing was the collective musical statement. It was, you know, in a weird way, look, a lot of guitar solos on that album, you know, make no mistake, but it's not so much about the spotlight concept of the guitar solo on that album. For me, it's more about capturing the energy of the group interaction at that moment, and the sort of
you know, unbridled energy, if you will, of that group, you know, sort of, you know, I mean, I was 27 when I started recording that. We were all in our mid-20s, the three of us. And this sort of, you know, when you're a young male in your mid-20s, you know, there are going to be disagreements and there are going to be strong opinions. And, you know, I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I think it just is to some extent, you know. And I wanted to capture the musical statement that could become of those energies interacting.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's good. And yeah, that makes all good sense to me. And how it shakes out is how it shakes out. And that's in retrospect, like you said, you probably don't go back and listen to that stuff because you're done with it now, right? Like you might recreate it when you're playing out, obviously, but like to go back and pour over it now is a lost cause, so to speak, because you've already made those decisions.
I try to be at peace with it because I'm gonna go back and say, gee, I would have done that differently. Of course I would have done it differently. Times changed, I've changed, you know, and we all changed to some extent. You know, in some way I hope grow, you know, our opinions might change a bit, especially you know, toward a wide variety of things, but you know, guitar tone, you know, your opinion might change on that and think, gee, I wouldn't do it that way now. Yeah. Well, of course you wouldn't. It's futile looking back, you know, time changes, you know, things change.
It's true. It's true. Well, Ben, thank you so much, man. I just, I'm going to wrap it up here. I appreciate you spending the time and telling such great stories and insight into how you became the player that we're watching currently, you know, in this current time from the early stages. So thank you.
Thanks, Chrys. Man, I really appreciate it. Thank you for creating such an open environment to talk about things musical and existential, and it's been great fun.
Thanks so much, man. I hope you have the best day ever, dude. And let's be in touch.
You too, Chrys, man. Thank you.
Players Pick Podcast, Picks and Perspective with Chrys Johnson. Pool table. Pain.